OrasiLabs supports both instructor-led and on-demand classes, and this video will cover how to schedule a new instructor-led class. Now, a class in OrasiLabs is a specific training event with start and end dates. Now, I do want to point out that I have already set up a few things that will be used to create our new class, so let's go ahead and review those things first. Each class in OrasiLabs must have an instructor and a published lab template, so those two things are required. Optionally, you can also attach a library to a class, and let's go ahead and do a quick review of those prerequisite items. Instructors must be defined here as a user in OrasiLabs. Now, this is of course not an issue if you are creating a class that you will teach, but if you are creating a class for another instructor, that person will need to be defined here as a user. A lab template is what defines the environment for the class labs, and a published template is required to create a class. So if you haven't already created and published your lab template, you'll want to do that first. A library contains files that can be pushed to the instructor and student desktops. This step can always be done after the class is created, but I wanted to point out that I've already done that step. So I have a library here that has a student exercise file. And we'll see how each of these is used to create a class. To create a class, you'll start here in the left-hand menu and select Classes. You'll see any classes already out there, and from here you can select to add a new one. You'll be prompted through a series of steps starting with the basic information. You must specify a class type, and as I mentioned in the intro, this will be an instructor-led class. You'll provide the name, and you can also provide a description here if you want. Also in this step, the start date, end date, and start and end times will be provided. In step 2, you'll specify the lab template. Any published templates that you have access to will appear in this list. So as I mentioned in the intro, if you haven't created and published the necessary template, you'll need to go ahead and do that now. For each template, you will also specify which labs will be created using this template. Now, the most common option here is probably instructor and student, which creates an environment matching this template for any instructors as well as each student. And that's what I'll choose for this example. If the student and instructor machines need to be different, you could have one template for the instructor and then another for the student setup. Shared is also fairly common and used when you want the students to share an environment. So this is common when training on an application where students are connecting to the same application server, but each have their own client machine. So in that scenario, I would actually have two lab templates, one template for the client machine, which would be instructor and student, like we've selected here, and then a second template for the shared environment. In this example, I'll stick to the one template, but you could continue to add additional templates as needed. By default, the instructors will be able to start and stop the labs as needed for each class. If you want to define a schedule for the labs and have them start and stop automatically, you could select the calendar icon here and add a schedule. For example, you can schedule the labs to start 10 minutes before the class start time and shut down 10 minutes after the class end time. And this schedule is optional, so as an instructor, if you want to just start and stop the machines when you're ready, you would just not add a schedule here. Once you have your environment defined, you will name your instructors and students. Each class must have an instructor, and you can add more than one instructor if necessary. Anyone named here as an instructor will be able to stop and start the class and interact with the student labs. There are a few ways to add students. You can type a name here and do a search. If the student has previously taken a class, they can then be selected. You could also enter students by email. If they've not already taken a class, you'll be asked to enter some additional information. If you have names and email addresses in a spreadsheet, they can also be imported. Step 4 has some optional information that we can add to this class. I mentioned libraries in the intro. So if there are files that we want to push to the class machines, we can do that with libraries. By default, any files in the selected library will automatically be deployed to the class labs when they start. If you want to manually push the files during class, you can uncheck the auto deploy option here. Then when you deliver the class, look for the library section where you will find an option to push files out to the class labs. If this is going to be a virtual class and you want to include virtual meeting information, that can be included here. If you do include it, the students will have the meeting info in their registration email, and they will also see the meeting link when they access their environment. You can configure notifications to go out to instructors and students. One important thing to realize is that once students are added, like we did in step 3, they will automatically get an email similar to this that they can use to access the class. So you do not need to do anything at all for students to get an email telling them that they've been registered and giving them the access information. But besides that automatic email, if there are additional notifications that you want to send, those can be configured here. For example, maybe there is some pre-work to do before the class, or maybe you want to send a reminder the day before class. This class is now created and is here in the list of classes. Opening it up, we can see what template is being used and which students are registered. So it's always a good idea to check that. I mentioned earlier that the students will get an email notification that they've been registered for class. That email also contains a connection check that students can run to verify that there will not be any connection issues. So as an instructor, it's a good idea to keep an eye on who has performed the connection check. And if that's not getting done, you could always reach out to them if you want to make sure they're good to go. If you do need to edit this class, you can choose Edit from here in the top left, and there you can make any necessary changes to the class.